Let's talk about the kill chain. So they call this the kill chain because it's derived from the military. So it defines the steps that are required from the start to the finish of the hack. Usually in movies you see everything happens at once. In the real world it's often done in several stages or several steps, starting with recon and finally ending with exfiltration. So these are the steps in a model developed by Lockheed Martin. As the kill chain or the cyber kill chain, which basically describes all the steps for the hack to be completed. So it has 7 steps. Each of these steps is more expensive to mitigate. So 7 steps, and every step increases the risk. So in the first step there is very low risk in the reconnaissance step, because basically the attacker is researching your infrastructure. So that is the lowest step. Whereas on the other side of the spectrum, or at the final step, they're already inside your system and already controlling your computer. So that has a lot of risk, and also the cost to contain and mitigate will be very high at that point. So every step increases the cost to contain, increases the risk, and the difficulty to mitigate. So in the first step, the attacker does is perform research on the target. So probably has one or more websites, maybe one or more systems, and it tries to make a map of all those systems and websites, everything that's publicly available on the targets. So on what the attacker wants to attack. So in the case of a company, it might be several servers that is running, maybe a mail server, web servers, maybe other systems that are publicly available. So it makes a big map and finds out general information about those systems. Like, are these systems interacting with the network, maybe running a web server, a file server, kind of servers, maybe remote desktop servers running. So it tries to make a map of that. So that's the reconnaissance step. So basically it's the attack research step. First it needs to know what it can attack before it can attack, because of course maybe the company is only running Mac computers, and if the attacker would then send Windows programs, of course that's not going to work. So first they'll investigate, do research on the target, on the company that they want to attack. That's the reconnaissance step. In the next step, they create a payload. A payload is a malicious instrument that can be delivered to the target. So that can be a malicious PDF, a malicious Word document, or Excel document. It can be simply an executable, so Windows executable, maybe Android executable if that's what they're using, or a Mac executable. So it doesn't really matter which kind of systems, just will craft malware, malicious software, based on the information they have before. So if the company is running those computers, of course they are most likely to use maybe Microsoft Office malware, or maybe malware for executables like Windows executables and stuff like that. If the company is just using Mac computers, then they'll create malware for that. So maybe Apple applications, DMG applications, or just Office files as well. So it really depends on the system. So if they are using Android, they will create Android malware in this step. So it can also be that they create several types of malware if they're using multiple systems. So if they're using Windows and systems, the attacker can craft both of the malware for both systems in order to hack both systems. So next is the delivery of the malware. The malware has now been created on the hacker's computer, and that needs to be executed by the victim, so by the company or whatever they're trying to hack. Now that can be by email, like, hey, check out this link. Maybe a certain website where they include it. It can be a USB drive. Different ways that the attacker might start the program or open the malicious Office document. Different ways that they can run that malware. But the important thing is that it needs to be delivered to the target. Because otherwise it's just sitting in the hacker's computer and doesn't do anything. You need to get this software onto the victim's computer. So if the system, the attacker finds some vulnerabilities, there can be software or hardware weaknesses, network asset, and they may be used to trigger this payload. Next, they will install make sure that they maintain access to the system. So first is the step to gain access, but then the victim would turn off the computer. It would need to be started all over again. So you want to make sure that you keep access into the system. So the attacker will leave behind some settings or some configuration so that they can always log in to their target. Basically, they install a backdoor such that whenever the computer is on, they can always access without having to go through all these steps again. So the basic idea of the installation is to maintain persistent access. So now if you notice that we did the steps pre-compromise and we compromised the system. So now whenever the computer starts, we have access into that computer. Next, you could do the post-compromise steps. Now the attacker could set up the command and control system, this step, and in that step can be an infrastructure that the attacker prepared where they can then remotely control one or more computers at the same time using that infrastructure. So it's basically a server, command and control server, where they can then control all the computers they hacked. So now that they went through all that hacking, they can do the actions, the intent. So whatever the objective was of all this hacking, it could be that they want to destroy data, or it could be that they want to hack other targets, or maybe they want to gain access to certain data. So here the hacker achieved the objectives, which is then the final step. Now, of course, that has like a lot of cost to contain and remediate. It's really hard to get anything off the internet. And really hard. Well, in the first steps, the delivery steps or weaponization step, or if the attacker is still doing research, is really easy to prevent at that stage. But at the final stage, when they're already controlling all your systems, it's really hard and expensive to all the damage. So every company out there uses email. One of the first things the attacker might try to do to find out more information, publicly available information, is to find out email addresses of people working in the company. And the reason why is that if they know email addresses, they can then send them malware that one or more of the employees might then open. So in this case, we have hunter.io, where we can search any company. Let's say this company, and go to find email addresses. So hunter.io, and you'll see a lot of email addresses there. It will just list them. So now we have email addresses of people working in the company. Now, if I were to sign up, I could actually see the whole email addresses. So there's some letters missing here, but you can use this for any company and find out email addresses of people working in that company. So basically you can find any company's email addresses, and the attacker might use that information. So it's not actually hacking at this point, but just collecting publicly available information. Now, another way to find out about people working there is using the internet. So you could search for whatever website, and for example, .com. So using the site colon flag and say LinkedIn.com. So using this query, it could then try to find out the page on LinkedIn and or people, employees working there. So that will also help to find out email addresses. Hunter.io can be used by the attacker to find out email addresses, which might be their way into the system, right? So it could be that they deliver the malware via email, and then that malware, if it's run by the then takes over their computer. So another thing that can be done is using urlscan.io and try to find out information about the websites. So there's multiple websites that actually scan the website of the companies. So you could do that and get some information about the website. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the website is often running on a different computer than the actual office are working. So in many companies, that's actually outsourced to some other company, which is then hosting the website. So the website is very often running in another company's work. It's something to keep in mind. However, keep in mind that many people work online and they share a lot of files on the sites. So this might be another way that hackers attack the system. They can collect information about the website, and maybe there's running one or more web applications. And they could then hack that web application to find out maybe passwords or files that they are not supposed to access and so on. So using urlscan.io, we can find out some more information, like this website's internet address. It's in the US. And they have some communication with Germany here. Their technologies they're using. So in this case, it's using a WordPress site, a blogging website. You can also find subdomains if they exist. So in this case, there's not any subdomains. You can find something about plugins they're using on the website and some general information. And so subdomains could be mail.thiscompany.com and maybe files.thiscompany.com and so on. They might be running different services for the employee. Mail is very common, of course. Many companies use mail. Maybe they're running their own mail server. So that would pop up then as well. You'll see different tabs here. You can find out which the request is making to different resources the website uses. And there are some different tabs here that you can try to look at. There are more information. So you can find out a lot of information just on the internet, which is actually legal. You can find out any information on the internet. It can be email addresses, be information about systems they're running. You might also check YouTube. Maybe you can get some information from that, or LinkedIn. In this case, on LinkedIn, we can find out different employees, but also the geographic location of the company, the size of the company, and more information. Now, size might be a useful indicator as well. So bigger companies might have more budgets for their cybersecurity, whereas small companies have very little budget for that. You can use the internet to find out a lot of information, and that the whole idea of this reconnaissance step is that the attacker performs research on publicly available information. So to try to find as much information as possible on the target, one of the first things they might do is to find out email addresses of people working in the company. They can do that with hunter.io. There's other sites as well. And then they have email addresses of the employees, which they may later use to send, for example, malware or virus or whatever, to do their malicious activity. So basically in this step, they collect as much information as possible. So let's say the attacker and the users are on the same network, maybe a public Wi-Fi on the same network. What the attacker might do is try to find more information about which devices are on that network. So on the right, we have just a random employee's computer, and on the left, we have the attack box. They might start a terminal and try to find other devices on the network. They can do that with ARP scan. So using the command arp-scan, which has to be run as the super user, so sudo on the network interface, and then which IP space you want to scan. So if I type ap-a/s, you can see your IP address, so 192.168.8. That's the first start of your network address, so you'll want to use that. And then we'll scan that range. So just by pressing enter, it will pop up all the other devices that are present on this network. So that's something the attacker might do because they want to collect as much information about potential devices or targets they can hack. So given this list of devices, you might do a more aggressive scan. So for example, this IP address, what system is it actually running? Is it a Mac computer? Is it a Windows computer? So they might do an aggressive scan using Nmap and specify the -O flag to detect the operating system. So Nmap scans for open connection ports. So ports are used to communicate, can be different types of ports like file sharing or remote desktop and so on. Every program communicates with a different port. Run this program as administrator in order to do the OS detection, so -O, and then the target computer. So if you press enter with this command, in this case, that is one of the hosts on the network, so it will scan which system and make the best guess which system is running. So it's saying here that, okay, this is a Microsoft Windows 2008 computer, maybe 7, phone, or Vista. Now that the attacker knows information about this system, he can also do that for other hosts on the network. So this is a Windows computer. And it might also scan the other computers. Is that a Windows computer, or maybe it's a printer or something else. Maybe it's an Apple computer, Linux computer. It can be anything, right? So they try to collect as much information as possible. So it can be using these command line tools, or it can also be on the internet, publicly available information. Now, of course, these command line tools will only work if you're on the same network. So if you're not on the same network, they might try to guess, like, okay, we can send Windows exploits, or Apple malware, Windows malware, and see just what works. The risk in that is, of course, is that you send the wrong malware. So Windows applications are not going to work on an Apple computer. So they want to know as much information to do the correct attack. So in this case, it detected that it's Microsoft Windows 2008. If we actually look at the employee's computer, you'll see it's running Windows 7. If we look at its IP address, you'll see that it matches. So ipconfig, you'll see it ends with 8.189. So that is the actual host we scanned. So the hacker actually managed to find out the system the victim is using. So that's the first step, to know about the systems, which systems are running, and also which services. So in this case, it's running some different services. Some of these are for file sharing. So on any Windows computer, you can share files easily. For example, if you right click on any folder, you can click properties, sharing, and share some folder on the network. Now, an attacker will also see that if that is being shared, it will show that as a service, that these are usually open in case that network file sharing is being used. Now, there's also some other things open here. It really depends on what you're running. Also, can be running a web server or SSH server or other remote desktop service even, and that would pop up here as well. So basically, this research step, the whole idea of this research step is to find out information about the victim. So it can be a company or organization, and the idea is to get all of the possible information in order to craft your attacks. So if they're running Windows, of course, you're going to make Windows malware next to send to the victims. If they're running Apple computers, you want to send that. Maybe they're running something completely different. Maybe they're running Chromebooks and using Android devices. So maybe then you want to target the Android devices. So the whole purpose of this step is just to collect as much information about your target. So next, what the attacker has a lot of information that they gathered in the reconnaissance step. So in this step, there is the weaponization step, in which they create malware, malicious software. So they might do that in Kali Linux, which is a system for hacking. And in that system, there's a tool that can create malware for you. Enlarge the font here. So they might use a command line tool to generate malware called MSF Venom. That tool can create malicious software for all kinds of systems. So that can be Windows systems, Apple systems, Android systems, Linux systems, and so on. Now, because of the previous step, we know that the target uses a Windows computer or one or more Windows computers. So they can create Windows malware. You'll see an example command here, which we can use. So this command, you see we create a malicious payload, a malicious program, payload.exe. So keep in mind here, we actually need to change one thing. We need to set an internet address, which is the address of our computer, or the computer we'll use to interact with the victim's computer. And so we can check our IP address. In this case, we're on the same network. Otherwise, you would need to use a publicly internet address, so maybe a cloud service where you're running Kali Linux, so that you then can connect to the victim's computer. So in this case, this is our network address, so we're just going to copy that. And in this example, both the attacker and the hacker are on the same, both the victim and the hacker are on the same network. So we can replace the L host here with the address. And this command will then create the malicious program. Now keep in mind, this is the Windows target, so that's why we specify here -p with the Windows flag. -p specifies the platform, So you'll see here -p payload, so a Windows payload. It has payloads for Android, for Apple, Linux, and so on. Next is our target's computer. So our internet address, the victim will connect to our computer. And that's why we need to specify that. Then we want to create an executable, so -f, the format exe. Exe is the Windows format. Because we're targeting a Windows computer, it can be an exe. Now, the payload can also be, for example, a document. In this case, that would be doc or XLSX for Excel, and so on. It can also be that it's for another system completely. For example, on Mac, they don't use exe, but DMG. And so we specify finally the file name -o with payload.exe. So once I press enter, it creates the malicious executable. So that is the next step. We create the well, that's not the next step in the kill chain. That's the same step. The weaponization step is all about creating malware. So in this step, we are just creating malicious software. In this case for the Windows computer, but it can be for other computers as well, for other systems. And this takes a moment. MSF Venom is not the fastest program. But then we'll have a malicious program that we can then use to compromise or to hack the victim's computer. So now that that's completed, you'll see we have a Windows payload and so on, the size of the program, and finally you'll see we created the malicious program payload.exe, which the Windows user might then execute. But in this step, it's only about creating the malware. It's not actually about delivering the malware to the victim's computer, because now we have the malware, we have the program on our computer, payload.exe, but obviously it's not going to do anything on our computer. We need to get that malware into the victim's computer. That is the delivery step. So that might be we upload this file somewhere on the internet and then send an email, hey, click on this, download this file. Or might be through WhatsApp, or well, on WhatsApp you would have Android or Apple platform. Might be through email that you can deliver it, or maybe on a USB flash drive. Different ways that you could get this file onto the target's computer, because they'll have to execute it. So the next step is the delivery step. We might just use the information in the reconnaissance step. Remember, we collected a lot of emails, so we might email those people with the malicious program attached, say install this program or take a look at this program. So this step is all about the weaponization step, in which they create malicious software. In this case we created payload.exe, and that is the whole part of this step. Now remember that we the command we use to generate the malware actually asks the program to connect to our computer. So we need to set up a listener. We can do that with Metasploit console. So let's create a new tab here. We start the Metasploit console, press enter. And what we'll do here is set up a listener so that the once the program is started, the victim actually connects to our computer. So it takes a moment to load here. Metasploit console always has a lot of payloads and a lot of options, so it takes a moment to start. Next we'll type use exploit multi-handler with slashes in between. Then we set the payload. You'll see the default payload is not correct. We are not using a generic payload. We are targeting a Windows computer. So if you remember the first command, this command, this is our payload, so we need to copy that. Set payload with the payload. Then remember we set it to connect to our computer, lhost, so we need to specify that as well. We specify our internet address, our IP address, paste it in, and then we type run, and what it will do is it starts listening, so that once the program is run. So now we're in the exploitation step. The employee received a link and it clicked that link to run the program. So let's say Let's say this is the link. Of course, you can upload the file anywhere. Okay, this is the wrong link. So let's say they got an email with that link and they click that email and then they click run because they want to install that program, or they just don't think about it. So they click run. And then you'll see the exploit has been run. And on the left here, the computer has now been successfully exploited. So you don't see anything on the computer, but we can remotely control the computer. For example, we can take a screenshot. And you'll see it saved a screenshot of the employee's computer onto our computer. We could watch just what they're doing. If we type screen share, then we can see what they are doing. We can browse their file system. For example, we can type there, and you'll see we are in the desktop directory. So now we might delete files or upload files. For example, we can type delete the first program. That must be, let's see, with the help command, we can see all the remote control commands. So in this case, it's just del. We can type del hash and press enter, and you'll see it deleted that program from the victim's computer. Now you can also upload files. If we type upload, we can upload a file from our hacker computer into the employee computer. For example, we might upload the program to the desktop. And you'll see now we are remotely controlling the desktop. We now uploaded the file, we deleted the file. You can take a look inside the computer and use the default command line commands to browse around the computer, like check the current directory, delete files. If you press help, you'll see and scroll up. See, we have file system commands. You can copy files, you can delete files, list files with the dir commands, you can download files, also edit files. You can make directories, remove directories, folders, upload files, and so on. And there's other things you can do as well. So you can control the whole file system. You can do network commands. You can find out more information about the network interfaces and which connections it currently has. You can do some system commands, so you can, for example, shut down the computer. And you can reboot the computer. So if we were to run that, it would down the computer while the employee is actually using it. You can terminate a certain program. And any other, you can list the running programs, for example, with PS. So let's do that. We type PS. And you'll see the programs they are running. So you'll see here, they're running Internet Explorer and some Windows programs. So if you press help, you can see all of the commands you can use to remotely control the computer. You can dump the passwords, play audio files, so play sound files, webcam control and microphone. We can record sound from the microphone or start a video chat. And basically we can control the whole computer, right? Using this command line interface, we can really mess around with that computer. So we have successfully exploited this computer. Now keep in mind that in this case of exploitation, the firewall was actually off on this computer. So if you go to System Security, Windows Firewall, see it's not running any Windows firewall. That's why it didn't block the connection. And also it's not running Windows Defender, so it's not scanning for malware at this point. So that's why this exploit. So in the case of like a more big organization, the employees might not be able to turn off the firewall or to turn off Windows Defender. In small organizations, maybe they find it annoying to use Windows Firewall, to have those pop-ups. Defender might slow down their computer, so maybe they just turn it off completely. Those kind of things happen in small companies. In larger companies, the hacker might need to do is also to bypass the Windows Firewall. So they might need to use additional tricks to bypass the Windows Firewall and the antivirus, the Windows Defender system, or whichever additional antivirus software they're running. So they might need to also bypass those. So in this case, it's a really simple setup where the employee wasn't running Windows Firewall or any security mechanisms. So now we can control the computer. We're in the command and control step. We can remotely control the victim's computer. Now in this case, it's just a one-to-one connection, right? We have the hacker and we have the victim's computer. But in the real world, professional hackers, what they will do is set up a command and control center where they can control multiple computers of their target at once. So not just a one-to-one. You'll see that before we set up a listener on this and be able that the victim connects to this computer. What they'll do instead is set up a command and control center, and then they can control one or more computers at once. Another thing they'll do is the installation. So that's actually the step before the command and control. And in the installation step, make sure that the connection is actually retained. So in this case, we are connected, we can remotely control the computer. And for example, let's say we say the victim must restart the computer. You'll see that the Windows computer is then restarting, but then our session is closed. So we can no longer control the computer. Now the victim has to run the program again. So we don't have persistent access into the system. So let's say they log in. And now we have the interpreter shell here. You'll see we are back in the original shell. We can no longer type commands. So one thing you might want to do is to start the application. So whenever Windows starts up, automatically start the program. So what you'll want to do is to try to get this program to automatically start. So we might try to take a look in the directories. We are not connected right now. So first, I need to set the payload again and set it to listen. Run. Let's say the victim run the program. So back to the original stage where we hacked the computer. Now we are by default in the desktop directory. We'll want this program to automatically start on startup. So we go one directory higher, take a look. We'll have a directory app data and some others. So we enter the app data directory. You'll see it had several subdirectories. Then we type cd roaming. Then Microsoft, Windows. And now we'll see several subdirectories. So we'll want to go to the Start menu directory. Programs. And then we have the Startup directory. So that's a lot of directories. This is the full path, so let me enlarge this a bit. Let me put it in full screen so you can see it better. So this is the full path where the directory is. So we'll want to put the program in there, right? We want to automatically start the program once the victim starts the computer. So we can upload a file in there. Okay, now the file is in there. And we can reboot the computer. So either we reboot it here using the command line or the victim reboots the computer. It doesn't really matter. It reboots the computer. So Windows is now restarting. And what we'll need to do is to be listening now. So make sure to actually be listening for a connection. Then the victim is starting the computer. And logging into the computer. And you'll see we instantly have access to the computer. We now have persistent access. Whenever the victim now starts the computer, we are inside his computer. So we can take a screenshot. For example, we can look at the directories. We have persistent access. So now this is a lot better than the initial stage, Because now, whenever the victim is started, whenever the computer is started, we can access his or her computer. So we just completed the initial step, which is the installation step. Because of that, now we can access the victim's computer whenever we want. Whenever it's running or whenever it starts, we are inside the computer. It automatically makes a connection to our attack box. So at final, now we have a look at we have completed the installation step. We can remotely control the computer. And finally, the hacker could then do their objectives. So maybe they're interested in destroying data, or maybe watching what they're doing, maybe getting access to certain data. So now the whole kill chain is completed. We have now quote-unquote killed the... Now what they might do next is to try to escalate privileges on the system. So by default, we are user John. Now that might or might not be an administrator user on the system. So what they might do next is to gain more access to other accounts on the system. So if you take a user account, in this case it's an administrator account. Many Windows users run as administrator, especially in small companies. Not a good practice, because then you can get access into, basically they can control the whole computer. So by limiting that is a good security practice. So now they might try to get access to other accounts on the system. Now in this case we are administrator, so we might just go to the users directory. Users. Okay, now we can access any of those directories because we are administrator. For example, we can go to the default and take a look at the files there, or any of the other users. In this case, we are already administrator. But if that's not the case, they might try to become administrator. Another thing the hacker might do is to try and gain access to other computers in the system. So a company doesn't usually have only one employee in the whole company. Usually there's more than one people working there, right? Maybe 20 employees or 200 or 2000, depending on the size of the company. So they might try to gain access to other systems or other devices on the same network, using the information they found in the first step, in the reconnaissance step.